In 1988, in the middle of one of the largest crowds Michael Jackson had ever faced, something terrifying happened in front of thousands of people, and almost no one noticed. Except Michael. What he did in the next few seconds didn't just save a life. It revealed the man the world never truly saw. Why did Michael suddenly stop the show? Who was the boy in the crowd? And what did Michael do afterward that would leave everyone in tears? This is the story they never told you about Michael Jackson. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. The lights exploded across the night sky as 72,000 people screamed his name. Michael Jackson stood at the center of the stage, the music thundering through the speakers, the ground vibrating under the weight of the crowd's energy. It was the Bad World Tour. The atmosphere was electric. The noise was overwhelming. From above, the audience looked like a living ocean. Waves of people moving, jumping, crying, reaching for him. Michael danced, spun, and froze in perfect silence as the crowd roared louder. Then he felt it. Something was wrong. Not on stage. Not in the band. In the crowd. His eyes shifted. Near the front barrier, he saw a movement that didn't match the rhythm of the show. Frantic, broken, panicked. A small figure, barely taller than the barrier, was being pushed from every direction. A boy. He couldn't have been more than 11. The pressure of the crowd had lifted him off his feet. His arms flailed, his face twisted in fear. No security guard noticed. No camera followed it. But Michael saw everything. The music continued. Michael raised his hand. The band didn't stop. He raised it higher. "Stop," he mouthed. The drummer slowed. The music collapsed into silence. The crowd froze, confused. Michael walked to the edge of the stage, pointing urgently. "Security there! Now!" Guards rushed forward as Michael dropped to his knees and leaned over the edge, reaching down. The boy's eyes locked onto his. "Hold on," Michael said. The guards pulled the child free from a crushing mass of bodies. The stadium was silent. The boy collapsed onto the ground, shaking, barely breathing. Michael climbed down from the stage. The crowd gasped. He knelt beside the boy, cradled his head in his hands, and whispered something no microphone captured. The boy's chest rose. Then again, he was alive. Michael signaled for water, for medics, for space. The show was forgotten. The crowd watched in stunned silence. As the medics lifted the boy onto a stretcher, Michael stood up slowly. His voice, trembling but firm, echoed through the stadium. "Please, take care of each other." Then he did something no one expected. Michael left the stage. He followed the boy, and what happened in the quiet hallway behind the scenes would change both of their lives forever. The corridor behind the stage felt like another world. The roar of the crowd faded into a distant echo, replaced by the sharp smell of metal, sweat, and electricity. Michael walked quickly, his heart still pounding, his jacket hanging loose as he followed the stretcher down the narrow hallway. The boy lay still, his face pale, his chest rising and falling too fast. A medic holding an oxygen mask to his mouth, while another checked his pulse. Michael stayed close, his eyes never leaving the child, his own breathing matching the boy's as if trying to keep him anchored to this world. They reached a small medical room, barely larger than a storage closet. The medics eased the stretcher inside, closing the door behind them. Michael remained standing in the hallway for a moment, his hand resting against the wall, his mind replaying the image of the boy's face in the crowd, the terror in his eyes, the way his small body had been swallowed by thousands of people who never even knew he was there. For the first time that night, Michael's knees trembled. He pressed his palm against his chest, steadied himself, and then stepped into the room. The boy's eyes fluttered open as the medics worked. He coughed weakly, the sound scraping against the silence. Michael moved to the side of the stretcher and knelt so their faces were level. "You're safe," he said softly. "You're okay now." The boy blinked at him, confusion clouding his expression. Then his gaze focused and his lips parted in disbelief. You're Michael Jackson," he whispered. Michael nodded. "What's your name?" The boy swallowed. "Evan." Michael smiled gently. "Evan, you're very brave." Evan's fingers twitched against the blanket. "I thought I was going to die," he said, his voice barely louder than the hum of the machines. Michael felt the words strike deep inside his chest. He reached out and carefully took the boy's hand. "I know," he replied, "but you didn't. You're here." The medics finished their checks and nodded. Evan would be okay, they said, shaken and bruised but alive. One of them added that if Michael hadn't stopped the show when he did, the pressure of the crowd could have crushed him completely. Michael closed his eyes for a second, the weight of that truth pressing on him. When he opened them again, he looked at Evan and said, "I'm going to stay with you for a little while." Outside the door, the show manager paced nervously. "Michael, we need to go back out," he urged. "The crowd is waiting." Michael stood slowly. "They can wait." The manager hesitated. "The schedule." Michael cut him off with a look so calm and serious it ended the conversation. "There's a child in this room who almost lost his life. Nothing else matters right now." He turned back to Evan, who was watching him with wide eyes. "Your parents are here?" Michael asked. Evan nodded. "My mom. She's out there somewhere." Michael squeezed his hand. "We'll find her." Michael stepped into the hallway and spoke to security. Within minutes, a woman was running toward them, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking as she called her son's name. Evan lifted his head. "Mom." She rushed into the room, falling to her knees beside the stretcher, clutching her son, sobbing. "Oh my God, oh my God," she kept repeating. Evan wrapped his arms around her neck as best he could. "I'm okay," he whispered. "He saved me." The woman looked up, her eyes meeting Michael's. She froze. Then she stood and took his hands, her entire body trembling. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved my baby." Michael shook his head gently. "He's strong." He held on. The woman sobbed again, pulling her son close, and Michael quietly stepped back, giving them space. He watched them for a moment, the reality of what had almost happened sinking in. Thousands of people outside were chanting his name, unaware that inside this small room, a life had been pulled back from the edge. After several minutes, Evan's mother wiped her eyes and turned to Michael. "He wanted to come tonight more than anything," she said. "He's your biggest fan." Evan nodded weakly. "I wanted to touch your hand," he said. Michael smiled sadly. "You don't have to almost die to meet me, okay?" Evan tried to laugh and winced. "Sorry." The doctor explained that Evan would need to go to the hospital for observation. As they prepared to move him, Michael knelt beside the stretcher again. "Evan," he said, "I want you to promise me something." The boy looked at him. "What?" "Promise me you'll always take care of yourself. And if something feels wrong, you move away, even if everyone else is going the other direction." Evan nodded slowly. "I promise." As they wheeled Evan out, Michael followed them all the way to the ambulance. The stadium manager called his name again, panic in his voice. "Michael, please." Michael turned. "Start the show without me for a few minutes." The manager stared. "What?" Michael's voice was firm. "Do it." The doors of the ambulance closed. The siren wailed. Evan's mother pressed her hands to the window, looking at Michael with gratitude and disbelief. Michael lifted his hand and waved. Only then did he turn back toward the stadium. When Michael finally returned to the stage, the crowd erupted, the cheers shaking the night. But Michael did not dance. He stepped to the microphone and held up his hand. "There was a young boy in the crowd who almost got hurt tonight," he said. "He's okay now. And I want everyone here to remember something. We're all in this together. We look out for each other." The stadium fell silent. "Take care of each other," he repeated. Then the music started again. But something had changed. And later that night, when the lights were gone and the noise had faded, Michael would do something no one in that stadium would ever forget. When the show finally ended, the stadium slowly emptied, the echoes of cheers drifting into the night like fading thunder. Michael remained on stage long after the last note had been played, standing alone in the glow of a single spotlight, staring out at the sea of empty seats. His body ached, but his mind was far from tired. All he could see was Evan's face, pale and frightened, disappearing into the ambulance. The image replayed again and again in his thoughts, as if his heart refused to let the night end the way every other concert night had before. Backstage, the mood was quiet, almost reverent. Crew members spoke in low voices. Dancers removed their costumes slowly, as if they were afraid of breaking the fragile sense of reality that had settled over everyone. Michael walked through the corridors without saying much, his head bowed, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his jacket. When he reached his dressing room, he closed the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling a breath he didn't know he had been holding. He sat down and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The makeup, the lights, the glittering jacket, the legend staring back at him all felt strangely distant. In that moment, he didn't feel like a performer. He felt like a man who had nearly watched a child disappear in front of him. A knock came at the door. One of the security supervisors entered carefully. "Michael," the boy's mother called. "They made it to the hospital. He's stable." Michael closed his eyes, relief washing through him, so strong his knees weakened. "Thank you," he whispered. That should have been the end of the night. But it wasn't. Michael changed quickly, pulling on a simple shirt and a dark jacket, his movements restless. The supervisor looked at him with concern. "Where are you going?" Michael hesitated. "I need to see him." The man frowned. "The hospital is an hour away in the press." Michael cut him off. "I don't care." They left through a side exit, slipping into the waiting car without attracting attention. As the city lights passed by, Michael stared out the window, silent, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. Every red light felt too slow, every passing minute too heavy. He wasn't thinking about the headlines or the tour or the schedule. He was thinking about a boy who had come to see his hero and almost lost his life in the process. When they reached the hospital, Michael pulled his hood up and followed the supervisor inside. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the air smelling of antiseptic and quiet fear. They found Evan's mother in the waiting room, sitting with her hands clasped, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw Michael, she stood so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. "You came," she whispered, stunned. Michael nodded. "How is he?" "They're still checking him," she said. "But the doctor says he's going to be okay." Her voice cracked on the last word. Michael sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The minutes ticked by slowly, the clock on the wall too loud in the silence. Finally, a nurse appeared and said they could see Evan. The boy lay in a small hospital bed, wires and monitors attached to him, his face bruised but peaceful. When his eyes opened and he saw Michael standing there, they widened in disbelief. "You came," he said softly. Michael stepped closer. "I told you I would." Evan smiled weakly. "My mom said you had a whole show to do." Michael shook his head. "Some things are more important." Evan's hand moved, searching. Michael took it. The boy's fingers were cold but steady. "Are you scared?" Michael asked. Evan shrugged. "A little, but I'm okay." Michael nodded. "You're very strong." They talked quietly. About school. About music. About the first time Evan heard one of Michael's songs. Michael listened as if nothing else in the world existed. And in that small room, something invisible and powerful took shape. Something neither of them could have named at the time. When it was time for Michael to leave, Evan's grip tightened. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Michael met his eyes. Yes. He meant it. As Michael walked back into the night, the city felt different. The light seemed softer, the noise less sharp. He realized something important had happened that had nothing to do with music, and everything to do with being human. But the story between Michael and Evan was far from over, because what Michael would do next would change the course of that boy's life forever. The next morning, Michael woke up with Evan's face still in his mind. The image of the boy in that hospital bed, bruised but smiling, would not leave him. It followed him through breakfast, through meetings, through rehearsals for the next show. While everyone around him spoke about lighting cues, sound checks, and travel schedules, Michael found himself thinking about school notebooks, scraped knees, and the simple, fragile miracle of waking up alive. By early afternoon, he had made a decision. He asked his assistant to find out which hospital Evan had been transferred to for continued observation, and whether his mother would be willing to receive a visitor. There was hesitation on the line, a reminder about privacy, about the press, about security. Michael listened quietly and then said, "Please." 2 hours later, he was sitting in the back seat of a car again, wearing the same dark jacket, watching the city pass by. This time he brought something with him. A small bag filled with art supplies, a sketchbook, colored pencils, a soft stuffed animal he had picked up from a nearby store because he remembered the way Evan's hand had searched for something to hold the night before. The hospital was calmer in the afternoon. Evan's mother was sitting beside his bed when Michael entered. She stood again, startled, her eyes filling. "You really meant it," she said. Michael smiled. "I always do." Evan's face lit up when he saw him. "You came back." Michael handed him the bag. "I thought you might be bored." Evan opened it slowly, his eyes widening. "For me?" "All of it," Michael said. They spent the next hour drawing. Evan showed him pictures of superheroes and dragons. Michael sketched a small stage with a boy standing in the front row, smiling. They laughed when Evan tried to guess which one was Michael and which one was him. At one point, Evan grew quiet. He stared at the page for a long time, then looked up. "I was really scared," he said. "When everyone started pushing, I couldn't breathe. I thought I was gone." Michael felt something twist inside his chest. He set his pencil down. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I stopped everything. Because you matter." Evan studied him. "Even though you don't know me?" Michael nodded. "Especially because I don't." Evan swallowed, then nodded. They talked about his school, his friends, the concert. Evan admitted he had been trying to get closer to the stage because he wanted Michael to see him. Michael's heart sank. "I wish you had just waved," he said gently. "I would have seen you." Evan smiled shyly. "I didn't think you would." Michael leaned closer. "I always see the people in front." Before Michael left, he knelt beside the bed and said, "I'm going to make sure you're okay. And I'm going to make sure that never happens to you again." Evan's mother watched, her hands pressed together, tears sliding down her cheeks. Over the next weeks, Michael kept his promise. He called the hospital. He arranged for private counseling for Evan to help him process the trauma. He made sure the family had everything they needed. Not once did he allow any of it to reach the press. Evan recovered quickly, physically at least, but the fear lingered. He had nightmares about being trapped, about screaming, and no one hearing him. On those nights, his mother would tell him stories about how Michael had seen him, how Michael had run toward him, how the music had stopped just for him. One evening, Michael called Evan himself. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better." Evan said, "But sometimes I still get scared." "That's okay," Michael replied. "Being scared means you remember, and remembering helps you stay safe." There was a pause. Then Evan asked, "Why did you really stop the show?" Michael thought for a moment. "Because when I was a kid, I wish someone would have stopped the world for me once." Evan didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. As the tour continued, Michael arranged something special. He invited Evan and his mother to the final show of the European leg, not as fans in the crowd, but as his personal guests. They would sit in a private section, safe, with full security, where no one would push or shout or crush. When the night arrived, Evan walked into the stadium holding his mother's hand, his eyes wide, but this time not with fear, with wonder. Michael met them backstage before the show. He knelt in front of Evan and adjusted the boy's jacket. "You ready?" he asked. Evan smiled. "Yeah." Michael placed a small badge around Evan's neck. "This means you're with me tonight." Evan's eyes filled. "Really? Really?" As the show began, Michael looked out into the crowd, and for a moment, instead of seeing thousands of faces, he saw one boy, sitting safely, smiling, and he knew their story was only beginning. The final show of the European tour carried a different kind of electricity. It was not just the roar of the crowd or the glow of the stage lights, but something quieter, deeper, moving beneath everything. Michael felt it as he stood in the wings, listening to the audience chant his name, the sound rolling through the stadium like thunder. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed, but his thoughts were not on choreography or timing. They were on a small boy sitting safely behind the curtain, waiting for the night to unfold. Evan and his mother were in the private section Michael had arranged, far from the pushing and the chaos of the main floor. Evan sat straight in his seat, gripping the badge around his neck, his feet swinging slightly as he tried to look calm. His mother kept her arm around him, still afraid to let go, as if the memory of the hospital room might come rushing back if she did. When the first note hit and the lights exploded across the stadium, Evan's mouth fell open. The crowd leapt to its feet. The ground vibrated. He looked around, stunned, then back toward the stage, his eyes searching for Michael. And Michael found him. In the middle of the performance, as he moved across the stage, Michael glanced toward the private section. He saw Evan, small and bright in the sea of people, standing on his chair, waving both hands with everything he had. Their eyes met. Michael smiled, and in that moment, it felt like the entire stadium faded away. After the show, while the crowd slowly emptied and the crew dismantled the stage, Michael went straight to Evan. He knelt in front of him again, the same way he had in the hospital, and said, "Did you have fun?" Evan nodded hard. "It was the best night of my life." Michael laughed. "Mine too." But what Michael had planned next would mean even more. He invited Evan and his mother onto the stage after the crowd had gone. The vast space that had been so overwhelming days before now stood silent and still. Evan walked carefully across the floor, his footsteps echoing, his eyes wide as he looked up at the lights. "This is where you were standing," he whispered. Michael nodded. "And this is where you were." Evan looked confused. Michael walked him to the edge of the stage and pointed to the spot in the crowd where he had seen him that night. "That's where I first noticed you." Evan's face softened. "You really saw me." Michael placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "I always will." They sat together on the edge of the stage, their legs dangling, the empty stadium stretching around them like a giant sleeping animal. Evan asked him questions about the tour, about dancing, about how it felt to hear so many people cheering. Michael answered each one carefully. But then he asked Evan something. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Evan shrugged. "I don't know. I used to think I wanted to be famous. Now I just want to be alive." Michael felt his throat tighten. That's the most important thing. Before they left the stadium, Michael handed Evan something wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was one of his gloves from the show. "For you," Michael said. Evan stared at it as if it were made of light. "Are you serious?" Michael nodded. "I want you to remember this night. And I want you to remember that you're stronger than you think." Evan hugged him without hesitation, his small arms wrapping tightly around Michael's waist. Michael returned the hug, closing his eyes. Over the following months, Michael stayed in touch with Evan. Letters were exchanged. Phone calls happened late at night after school. Evan told him about his nightmares, about his recovery, about how he'd started carrying the glove in his backpack for courage. One day, Evan wrote, "I'm not scared in crowds anymore." Michael read that line over and over. But the story was not finished, because 1 year later, Evan would make a decision that would honor the night Michael stopped the world for him, and it would bring both of them to tears when they met again. The year passed slowly and quickly at the same time. Evan grew taller, his voice deepened. The nightmares became less frequent, and the scar the fear had carved into his memory began to soften. But he never forgot the night the music stopped for him, not for a single day. The glove Michael had given him stayed in a small box beside his bed. On difficult mornings, he would open the box, touch the fabric, and remember that someone in the world had seen him when he was disappearing. He and Michael wrote to each other often. Michael's letters were careful, thoughtful, filled with questions about school, friends, and how Evan was feeling. Evan's letters were messy and honest, written in rushed handwriting, full of stories about teachers, soccer games, and moments when the world still felt too loud. In every letter, Evan thanked him, and in every reply, Michael wrote the same thing. "You don't have to thank me. You matter." One afternoon, Evan's school counselor announced a new program focused on emergency response and crowd safety. They were looking for student volunteers. Evan felt something shift inside his chest. The memory of the stadium, the pressure, the panic, the moment everything had almost ended, rose in his mind. Without overthinking it, he signed his name on the list. He trained for months, learned first aid, crowd management, how to stay calm in chaos. The more he learned, the stronger he felt, not just physically, but in a way that comes from understanding what once terrified you. He wrote to Michael about it. Michael replied immediately. I'm proud of you, the letter said. You're turning fear into purpose. The next time Michael toured near Evan City, he invited Evan and his mother backstage again. Evan walked the corridors with more confidence now, but when he saw Michael waiting, that same old emotion rushed over him. They hugged like family. Michael noticed the change. You grew, he said. Evan smiled. So did my courage. They talked about the training program. Michael listened carefully, nodding, asking questions. When Evan finished, he looked at Michael and said, I want to help people like you helped me. Michael swallowed hard. That night, as Michael stood on stage, he thought about the boy who had once nearly been lost in the crowd and now stood steady behind the curtain, learning how to save others. It felt like something had come full circle. Months later, at a local sports event in Evanstown, the crowd began to surge unexpectedly. A small girl stumbled near the front, knocked off balance by the pressure. Evan saw it happen. Everything slowed. He remembered the noise of the stadium, the crushing fear, Michael's hand reaching for him. Evan pushed through the crowd, steady and calm, shouting for people to give space. He knelt beside the girl, helped her to her feet, and guided her out of the crush just as security arrived. The girl's mother sobbed and hugged him. Evan's hands were shaking, but he was smiling. That night, Evan wrote to Michael, I did it. I saw someone and I didn't look away. Michael read the letter and cried. He wrote back, You didn't just survive that night. You became it. Years passed. Evan grew into a young man who worked in event safety, traveling to concerts and festivals, making sure no one else had to feel what he once felt. On the wall of the small apartment hung a photograph of him and Michael standing together on that empty stage, their arms around each other, the stadium silent behind them. When Evan was 25, he received a message from Michael inviting him to a private gathering. When they met, Michael embraced him tightly. Look at you, he whispered. They spent the evening talking about life, about choices, about how moments of fear can become moments of purpose. Before they parted, Evan said, You saved my life. Michael shook his head gently. You saved many. Evan's eyes filled, and that was when he realized something that would stay with him forever. Sometimes the greatest gift a person can give is not just a moment of rescue, but the courage to rescue others. The last time Evan and Michael stood together, the world was quiet. No stage, no screaming crowds, no lights, just two people sitting on a wooden bench near the ocean, watching the sun slide slowly into the water as evening wrapped the sky in gold and violet. The sound of waves was gentle, steady, the kind of sound that makes everything inside you slow down. Evan had grown into himself. There was calm in his eyes now, the kind that only comes from surviving something that once felt impossible. Michael noticed it immediately. You're different, Michael said. Evan smiled. You are too. They sat for a long time without speaking, letting the silence carry all the things that didn't need words. Then Evan broke it. I think about that night all the time, he said. Not the fear. The moment after. When everything stopped. When I saw you looking at me, and I knew I wasn't alone. Michael closed his eyes. I felt it too, he said. Like the world paused just long enough for me to remember why I was here. Evan looked down at his hands. I used to think my life was divided into before and after that night. Now I realize it was a beginning. Michael nodded slowly. You know, Evan continued, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't seen me. Michael opened his eyes and met his gaze. I don't. Evan smiled faintly. Me neither. The sky darkened as the sun disappeared, leaving a soft glow along the horizon. Evan stood and walked a few steps toward the water, then turned back. I wanted to tell you something, he said. I start my new position next month. Head of crowd safety for a major event organization. Michael's face lit up. That's incredible. Evan shrugged. It's because of you. Michael shook his head. It's because of who you chose to become. They walked along the shoreline, their footprints filling with water behind them, erased as quickly as they were made. Evan told him about his plans, about the people he wanted to protect, about the quiet sense of purpose that had become his compass. When the night settled in, they returned to the bench. "Do you ever think about the people you didn't save?" Evan asked softly. Michael's breath caught. "Every day," he said. Evan nodded. "Me too." They sat with that truth between them. Then Evan reached into his jacket and pulled out the glove. It was older now, carefully preserved, the fabric warm but clean. "I brought this," Evan said. "I thought maybe it was time to give it back." Michael stared at it. "That glove doesn't belong to me anymore," he said gently. "It belongs to the boy who learned how to live." Evan swallowed. "I don't think I would have learned without you." Michael placed his hand over Evan's. "And I don't think I would have remembered who I was without you." They both smiled, the kind of smile that carries history and gratitude and quiet love. When they finally stood to leave, Evan turned once more toward the ocean. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Michael looked at him with warmth and said, "By being who you are, that's more than enough." They hugged. It wasn't the kind of hug people see on television. It was the kind that happens when two lives touch in a way that cannot be undone. As Evan walked away, Michael stayed on the bench, watching the horizon, listening to the waves. He thought about the night the music stopped, the boy in the crowd, the hand reaching out, the moment that changed everything. And he understood something at last. Not every miracle happens on a stage. Some happen in the space between fear and courage, between one heart and another. Michael Jackson closed his eyes and breathed in the night. Somewhere out there, a man named Evan was walking forward, carrying a purpose that began with a single moment of rescue. And that was enough. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Michael Jackson. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Michael Jackson.